Snow was falling in slow, deliberate spirals, as if the night itself were exhaling its weariness into the winter air. The train station lanterns flickered like lonely guardians fighting sleep, their dim halos trembling against the wind. Colt Remington Hale stepped down from his wagon and felt the cold settle into his bones in the familiar way a long-kept grief sometimes does, quiet, persistent, impossible to argue with. He had come only for supplies before the storm worsened, but some nights, fate rearranges the pieces without asking permission. On the far bench beneath the station roof, a woman sat curled in on herself, her thin shawl clinging desperately to her shoulders. Snow dusted her hair and lashes. She didn't shake it off. She barely blinked. Colt paused, his boot halfway to the steps.
Ass.
Because something about her stillness reached for him like a whispered plea carried by the wind. Her hands were wrapped around nothing, as though she had been holding hope, but lost her grip on it somewhere along the way. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. She lifted her head only when his shadow fell across her lap. And in her eyes, he saw a storm fiercer than the one gathering in the sky, fear. Exhaustion and a brave attempt to hide both. "You'll freeze out here." "Ma'am," he said, his voice low, warm, meant to offer shelter rather than intrusion. "I'll be fine," she whispered. Though her lips were blue and her fingers stiff, she tried to sit straighter, dignity rising like a wounded bird still determined to fly. Colt recognized that kind of pride. He had worn it once when the world had gone silent on him. "Storm's coming strong," he said. "You got somewhere waiting for you?" Her gaze drifted toward the empty tracks, bare rails icing over with each breath of winter. The train was supposed to come an hour ago. A swallow trembled in her throat. "They told me it won't arrive till sunrise." "Sunrise is a long way off," Colt replied. When the wind surged, she shuddered deeply, and that small involuntary tremor broke something open inside him. Without asking, he shrugged off his heavy coat and laid it gently around her shoulders, arranging it the way one might settle a blanket around a fevered child. She inhaled sharply at the warmth, and a tear tracked silently down her cheek, more from relief than emotion. Though Colt suspected there was plenty of both. "You don't have to," she began. "Sometimes folks need warmth more than words," he said. "And sometimes giving it's the least a man can do." She looked down, embarrassed by her own need. "My name is Evelyn Marlowe," she murmured, as though offering her name cost something. "Colt Hal," he answered, tipping his hat when he stepped inside the small station office to ask about the storm. He overheard the clerk muttering about strays drifting in from failed towns, and girls who come with more trouble than luggage. Colt shot him a look that made the man swallow his words. But the damage had already been done. Evelyn heard the tone, even if she didn't hear the words. She was standing when he came back, clutching the coat around her like borrowed courage. "I don't want to be trouble for anyone," she said softly. "You're not trouble," Colt replied. "Cold is." Her eyes glimmered with disbelief that someone could speak so gently to her without asking. What she'd done wrong to deserve hardship? Colt didn't pry. He could sense the way her past shadowed every breath, and he knew some stories needed warmth before they could be told. "I've got a wagon 'bout ready," he offered quietly. "Town's just 15 minutes' ride. Boarding house'll be warmer than this bench." She hesitated, not out of fear of him, but out of fear of accepting kindness. She didn't think she was allowed anymore. But another gust of wind pressed the cold deeper into her bones, and she nodded. Giving in not to him, but to survival, Colt helped her into the wagon, careful not to touch more than necessary. The horses snorted clouds into the night, impatient to move. As they set off, Evelyn wrapped the coat tighter and stared at the snowy dark, her breath trembling with each inhale. Neither spoke for several minutes. The night moved around them in thick, sweeping drifts, and the sounds of hooves softened into a quiet rhythm that felt strangely comforting. Colt stole glances at her, not out of curiosity, but in quiet worry for how pale she looked. Evelyn noticed his glances, but pretended she didn't, unsure how to receive the concern. "You from far?" Colt asked finally, his voice barely louder than the wind. "A few towns east," she said. "I worked as a nurse there." Her voice faltered, and she looked down at her hands, as though expecting judgment to fall. Things went wrong. I needed to leave. Colt didn't push. Instead, he nodded once, affirming her right to silence. As they reached town, lanterns glimmered through windows like small pockets of hope. But the sight didn't comfort Evelyn. People peeked from behind curtains when the wagon passed. Whispers traveled faster than winter winds in small towns. She lowered her eyes, ashamed of being noticed at all at the boarding house. Mabel Thornton stood in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. When she saw Evelyn shaking, she softened. Mabel was the kind of woman whose empathy flickered to life before her suspicion. She ushered them in, wrapping a thick blanket around Evelyn's shoulders. "You poor thing," Mabel murmured. "Storm like this ain't fit for anyone. Come warm yourself by the stove." Evelyn managed a nod of gratitude, her voice too fragile to trust. Colt spoke quietly to Mabel out of earshot, arranging a room for the night. When he returned to Evelyn, she tried to hand his coat back, but he stopped her with a small gesture. "Keep it for now. I'll fetch it in the morning. You've done more than enough," she said, tears threatening again, not from sadness, but from the strange ache of being seen without contempt. Colt tipped his hat lightly. Everyone needs a hand now and then. As he turned to leave, Evelyn's voice stopped him. "Why? Why were you kind to me? You don't even know who I am." He paused at the threshold, snow swirling behind him like drifting smoke. He didn't look back right away. He chose his words with the weight of a man who had learned to measure truth carefully. "Seen a lot of folks left out in the cold," he said softly. "Sometimes the world's cruel for no good reason. Doesn't mean we have to be." Then he stepped outside, letting the door close gently behind him. Left alone, Evelyn approached the small mirror in the corner of the room. Her reflection startled her. Winter had carved shadows under her eyes. She touched her cheek, remembering how fear had become a second skin these past months. But for the first time in a long while, she felt a fragile thread pulling her back toward herself. Some quiet reminder that she was more than what had happened. She sank onto the bed, letting her body finally surrender to warmth. The blanket smelled faintly of lavender and wood smoke. Colt's coat around her shoulders felt heavier than cloth. Felt like a borrowed moment of safety. Outside, the storm intensified, rattling the shutters. Yet inside the room, different kind of stillness settled, one not born of despair, but of the first fragile breath of hope. Evelyn lay down, exhaustion overtaking her in slow waves. Before sleep claimed her, she whispered into the darkness, as if testing the shape of the words, "Maybe tomorrow will be different." And though she could not know it yet, the quiet cowboy who had carried her through the snow had already begun to alter the course of her life in ways neither of them could anticipate. For now, the night held its breath around her, and the storm raged on, but she slept warm for the first time in weeks. The world outside might still be harsh, and morning might still bring whispers and unwanted eyes. But tonight, kindness had pierced the cold, and somewhere beyond the window, Colt Hal guided his horses home through the swirling snow, feeling without understanding why that something in him had shifted to. Morning crept into the town with a gray, reluctant light, as if even the sun doubted whether the world deserved warmth after such a bitter night. Colt woke before dawn, the way ranchers often did. But there was something new stirring inside him, an unfamiliar pull. He tried to ignore and couldn't. He found himself thinking of the woman sleeping in Mabel's boarding house, wrapped in his coat, holding on to the small measure of safety he had offered. He told himself he only wanted to be sure she hadn't taken ill from the cold. But the truth, quiet and undeniable, settled beneath his ribs. He cared. And caring, after so many years of stillness, frightened him more than he cared to admit. Evelyn rose slowly, feeling the soreness of travel and fear woven through her body. For a moment she didn't remember where she was. Then the soft crackle of Mabel's stove reminded her that she had been given a reprieve from the cold. She swung her legs over the edge of the bed and stood, steadying herself with a hand on the wall. The wooden floor was warm beneath her feet, heated from the kitchen below. It startled her warmth she hadn't expected, hadn't asked for, but needed more than she dared say. When she stepped outside the room, she found Mabel setting biscuits on the counter, steam rising from each like a promise of gentler days. Mabel's eyes softened. Sleep all right, dear. Well enough, Evelyn said. Thanks to you. And two, she stopped, embarrassed by how badly she wanted to finish that sentence with a name that didn't yet belong to her life. To Colt, Mabel supplied knowingly. He's a good man. Quiet, but good. Evelyn warmed her hands around a cup of tea, the heat spreading up her arms like a memory of comfort. I don't know why he helped me. Sometimes the right souls recognize each other without asking, Mabel said. Don't question grace when it shows up. Just breathe. But grace, as Evelyn knew, was rarely welcomed everywhere. Outside, the town was stirring. People stepped into the cold, wrapped in coats and gossip. She could feel their eyes drift toward her, measuring, guessing, judging. The whispering rose and fell like a tide. She had heard it too many times in too many towns. Shame crawled across her skin like frost. She tried to ignore it, but when she walked by the general store, she caught a few words. Nurse, from back east. Scandal, trouble follows. The kind of cruel murmurs that travel quicker than truth. Her throat tightened. She gripped her shawl, shrinking into herself the way someone protects an old bruise. Colt saw her from down the street and moved toward her with quiet purpose. He didn't reach for her, didn't make a scene. He simply stepped beside her, his presence a gentle wall against the world. The simple act made her breathe easier. You don't have to walk with me, she said softly. Don't mind walking, Colt replied. Besides, folks talk more than the wind. Easiest thing in the world is letting them blow past. His voice had a steadiness she leaned into without meaning to. Before she could respond, Sheriff Amos came rushing out of his office, waving a handkerchief and calling for help. We've got a problem, he said. A few children down with fever since dawn, spreading fast. Evelyn's instincts surged before her fear. What symptoms? High fever, shaking breath? And shallow, Amos said, scratching his head. Doc won't be back till tomorrow. We're in a tight spot. Colt turned to her, seeing the shift in her eyes, the old training awakening, pushing aside the weight of gossip. You know your work, he murmured. It wasn't a question. It was trust. I can help, Evelyn said. If you'll let me. Sheriff Amos hesitated, looking between her and the murmuring street. Rumor and hope battled in his expression. In the end, hope won by a hair. All right, he said. We sure need the help. Word spread quickly, and townsfolk gathered in the small clinic. Children lay on cots, their breaths thin and strained. Mothers hovered, frightened but desperate. Evelyn moved through the room with a quiet grace, checking temperatures, mixing herbs, murmuring soft reassurances. Every motion carried purpose. Her hands, which had trembled from cold the night before, now steadied with certainty. Colt stayed close, fetching water, holding lanterns, handing her whatever she needed without waiting to be told. It wasn't heroism. It was devotion, a silent belief in her that no one else seemed willing to offer. Hours passed. Under Evelyn's care, one child's breathing eased. Another's fever broke with the help of a poultice she crafted from Mabel's pantry herbs. The room began to shift, fear softening into awe, whispers turning from suspicion to gratitude. But not all voices quieted. Silas Crowther barged into the clinic, his boots striking the floor like accusations. What's this? He barked. Letting a woman with a tainted record tend to our young? She's the one they threw out back east. You're trusting her with our children? A hush fell thick as snowfall. Evelyn froze, her hands resting lightly on a child's forehead. Her eyes flickered with the sting of old wounds reopened. Silas walked closer, his voice rising. You don't know what she did, he sneered. Why do you think she's wandering alone? She's trouble. She brings misfortune wherever she goes. Colt stepped forward, not with fists, but with a quiet resolve that felt heavier than thunder. Enough, Silas. Silas scoffed. You don't know her story, Hale? I know what I've seen, Colt replied. I've seen her work. I've seen her save these children while you spread poison with your tongue. His voice remained steady, each word placed with the certainty of a man who doesn't need to shout to be heard. The only misfortune here is your spite. The room shifted. Parents looked at their recovering children, at Evelyn's exhausted posture, at the kindness she had shown without hesitation, Silas felt the tide turning against him and backed away with a frustrated growl, the weight of his influence crumbling in the room's soft warmth. When he left, Evelyn's legs nearly gave out. Colt caught her elbow, not gripping, just guiding, helping her sit. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, her strength nearly spent. "You did good," Colt said quietly. Her voice trembled. "I didn't know if anyone would believe I was telling the truth. Not after everything that happened." "Truth don't need everyone," Colt said. "Just needs someone." She met his eyes, then really met them, manned. Something inside her unfurled, fragile but steady. By late afternoon, the worst had passed. Children slept peacefully, fevers broken. Parents whispered blessings over Evelyn's hands. Sheriff Amos thanked her with tears glistening in his weary eyes. When she left the clinic, the snow had slowed, drifting softly through the winter air. Colt waited outside, breath clouding gently around him, as if he had always intended to stand there until she emerged. She stepped toward him, unsure of what words could bridge the distance between overwhelming gratitude and the quiet ache she felt. Colt removed his gloves slowly, as though revealing something more intimate than skin, and held out his hand, not demanding, not assuming, but offering. "You don't have to keep running," he said. "Not here. Not from me." Her breath caught. No one had ever offered her steadiness without condition. No one had asked her to stay because she mattered not, because she owed them something. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "So am I," Colt replied. "Most good things start that way." She placed her hand in his, and in that small gesture, the winter around them felt less cruel. Snow drifted over their joined hands as the day settled into evening. The town behind them had witnessed her strength. The man before her had offered something gentler than salvation acceptance. Their breath mingled in the cold air, two wounded lives beginning cautiously to warm each other. And as the old narrator's voice might have said, had life been a story told around a fire, sometimes the West changes not through gunfire or glory, but through the quiet decision to trust a kindness that reaches out in a world that taught you to expect none. If this tale touched something warm or familiar inside you, subscribe for more Wild West tales whispered from the heart.